A girl from a Scottish orphanage grew up to become the daughter of the most famous cowboy in American history. And for nearly 3 decades, almost nobody knew the truth about how that happened, or what it cost Roy Rogers and his wife Dale Evans to build the family they did. Mimi Rogers, Roy's adopted daughter, finally confirmed it. And once you understand the full picture, the legend of Roy Rogers becomes something far richer, far more human, and far more heartbreaking than the white hat and the golden horse ever suggested. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly on November 5, 1911, in Cincinnati, Ohio. There was nothing in that beginning that hinted at what would come, no connections, no inherited fame, no obvious path forward. What he had was a guitar, a relentless work ethic shaped by necessity, and a voice that could hold a room. During the Great Depression, he made his way to California and spent time as a migrant fruit picker in the San Joaquin Valley. In the evenings after the day's labor ended, he played music around the campfire and watched what it did to people. That observation, that music could lift spirits when almost nothing else could, became the quiet engine behind everything he built afterward. He eventually formed a singing group called the Pioneer Trio, later renamed the Sons of the Pioneers, and their early recording of Tumbling Tumbleweeds caught Hollywood's attention. Republic Pictures signed him in 1937, gave him a new name borrowing the surname from the recently passed American icon Will Rogers, and the trajectory of his life changed permanently. From 1943 onward, the Motion Picture Herald named Roy Rogers the #1 money-making Western star for 12 consecutive years. Roy and Dale Evans made 88 films seen by 80 million people every single year during the 1940s. His horse Trigger, his dog Bullet, his Jeep Nellie Bell, these weren't just supporting characters. They were pieces of a carefully constructed world that children across America made room for in their imaginations every week. He is the only person elected twice to the Country Music Hall of Fame, first in 1980 as a member of the Sons of the Pioneers, and again in 1988 as an individual. The Roy Rogers Show ran from 1951 to 1957, and his theme song Happy Trails, written by Dale Evans, became so woven into American culture that it was performed at the closing ceremony of the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. The man was not merely a movie star. He was a cultural institution, a shared moral reference point for an entire generation of Americans growing up in the post-war era. But the Roy Rogers that America knew and the Roy Rogers who existed behind closed doors were two very different people. And the distance between those two men is where the real story lives. Dale Evans entered Roy Rogers' life professionally in 1944, when they were cast together in the film The Cowboy and the Senorita. Her real name was Frances Octavia Smith, born on October 31, 1912, in Uvalde, Texas. Her own private history carried weight she rarely discussed publicly. She had married young, had a son named Tom, and kept that son's existence hidden when her entertainment career began, convinced that being known as a mother would close doors. It was a secret that followed her for years, and that she would later write about with candor. When Rogers' first wife Arlene died in 1946 following the birth of their son Roy Jr., known as Dusty, the grief Rogers felt was immense. Less than a year later, he married Dale Evans on New Year's Eve 1947. Some people in their circle thought the timing was too soon. History proved them wrong. That marriage lasted more than 50 years, until Roy's death in 1998. 50 years in Hollywood, an industry not known for permanence, speaks for itself. Together they were openly, earnestly Christian in an era when that was not particularly fashionable in show business circles. They appeared repeatedly with Billy Graham at crusades across the country. Their faith was not a performance. It was the structure beneath everything else they did. And it would be tested in ways that no amount of fame or devotion could protect a person from. In 1950, Dale Evans gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Robin Elizabeth Rogers. She was the only biological child born of their marriage, and from the very beginning, her life came with complications that would have broken many parents apart. Robin was born with Down syndrome. The medical and cultural understanding of the condition in 1950 was, by today's standards, almost nothing. Doctors routinely advised parents to institutionalize children born with Down syndrome. The prevailing wisdom of the era was that these children were best hidden, from public life, from neighbors, sometimes even from extended family. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans refused. Every medical professional they encountered urged them to place Robin in an institution. They declined. They brought her home. They included her in their lives completely. And in a decision that required genuine courage given who they were and how much they had to lose, they insisted that every family publicity photograph include Robin. This at a time when their studio was convinced that fan response to images of a child with a disability would be negative. That quiet insistence, made at the height of their fame against the advice of the people managing their careers, was a moral act. Most of the millions of people who admired Roy Rogers never fully knew it. Robin lived for just under 2 years. She died in August 1952, shortly before her second birthday, from complications related to mumps encephalitis. The grief that followed was the kind that doesn't heal so much as it reshapes a person permanently. Dale Evans processed it the way writers process the unspeakable. She sat down and wrote. The result was a book called Angel Unaware, published in 1953, written as if narrated by Robin herself from heaven, reflecting on her brief life and the purpose embedded within it. It became a bestseller. For thousands of parents in that era who had been told to be ashamed of their children with developmental disabilities, who had been advised to hide them away, Dale Evans's book was something close to a lifeline, a public declaration that those children's lives had meaning, dignity, and worth. The book's cultural reach extended well beyond individual families. After its publication, a group then known as the Oklahoma County Council for Mentally Retarded Children renamed themselves the Dale Rogers Training Center in her honor. One book, born from private devastation, changed the direction of an entire advocacy movement. And then something else happened. Something that remained private for nearly 3 decades. Marion Rogers, known as Mimi, was born in Scotland during the Second World War. Her early life was defined by instability and institutional care. She spent a significant portion of her childhood in an orphanage, without the permanence of family, without the certainty of a future that looked like anything at all. In 1954, 2 years after Robin's death, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans adopted Mimi. She was 13 years old. The culture shock alone was staggering in ways that are difficult to overstate. A girl from wartime Scotland shaped entirely by orphanage life, dropped without warning into the household of the most recognized cowboy on earth. But what Mimi has recalled in interviews is not the glamour or the strangeness of that transition. What she remembers is something far simpler. Inside the house, Roy and Dale were not celebrities. They were not America's cowboy and his queen. They were just mom and dad. The warmth was real. The stability was real. And Mimi, who had lived without those things long enough to understand their value with a kind of clarity that only deprivation can teach, recognized them for exactly what they were. But Mimi also confirmed something that cuts to the very center of why this story matters. She has said directly, in her own words, that she believes the adoption that changed her life was connected to Robin. That the loss of their biological daughter created a space in that family, not an empty space, but an open one, that Roy and Dale chose to fill by extending their home to children who had no home of their own. Mimi has said, with full understanding of what she is saying, that she probably owes her entire American life to Robin. To a little girl who lived less than 2 years. A little girl who never knew Mimi existed and never had the chance to meet her. Robin's life, and the grief that followed it, sent a ripple across an ocean and into a Scottish orphanage, and that ripple became Mimi's life. Sit with that for a moment. Roy and Dale did not stop with Mimi. They opened their home to several more children: Dodie, a Native American infant adopted at 7 months, Sandy, Debbie. Combined with the children Rogers already had from his first marriage, their household eventually included 9 children. A blended multiracial family built across years of both joy and sorrow, in an era when such a thing was genuinely unusual, born of 2 people who responded to loss not by shutting down but by expanding outward. The tragedies did not end with Robin. Their adopted daughter Debbie was 12 years old when she was killed in a church bus accident in 1964. Their adopted son Sandy, barely 18 and serving in the United States Army in Germany, died the following year. 3 children across the span of their lives.